A new police chief goes undercover in his own precinct. He wants to see how things really work without the polished presentations and the fake smiles. But what happens when a white officer spits in his face, assuming he's just another nobody? What unfolds next shocks everyone in the room, exposing the harsh reality of prejudice within the force. This is the story of how one man decided to fight against the toxic culture, even if it meant challenging his own team. It was a humid Tuesday morning in August. Richard Nelson, the newly appointed police chief, stepped out of his car in the heart of Blue Ridge, a small city hidden in the rolling hills of North Carolina. Richard didn't look like a typical police chief today. He wore a plain plaid shirt, old jeans, and scuffed sneakers. His plan was simple: blend in, observe, and see the raw truth of his department without the filters of authority. Richard had worked in law enforcement for over 20 years. He had faced challenges, but this job felt different. Blue Ridge had a reputation, whispers of misconduct, and a toxic culture had reached his ears. As a black man stepping into this leadership role, he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But he wasn't here to be comfortable. He was here to make a difference. The precinct's parking lot was busy with officers coming and going. Richard noticed the casual conversations and some curious glances in his direction. Nobody seemed to recognize him, which was exactly what he wanted. He had intentionally kept his arrival low-key, avoiding any grand announcements. Today, he was just another face in the crowd, here to see what his officers were truly like. He adjusted his baseball cap, took a deep breath, and headed towards the building. The air inside was filled with the sounds of ringing phones and the smell of stale coffee. Richard moved slowly, observing the groups of officers chatting, some laughing, and others deeply focused on paperwork. Nobody paid him any attention until he paused near the break room. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the noise. "Hey, you," a white officer called out. Richard turned and saw the officer striding toward him, a smug grin on his face. His badge read Officer Daniels. Behind him, a few other officers watched with interest. "Lost, are we?" Daniels mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This isn't a shelter. You need to take that mess somewhere else." Richard felt the words like a slap. He was caught off guard, unsure whether to reveal his identity or let the situation play out. Before he could react, Daniels stepped closer, his tone growing louder for his audience. "Didn't you hear me? Get out of here. We don't need people like you hanging around." Laughter echoed from the onlookers. Richard's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his cool. He pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his face calmly, and looked Daniels in the eye. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" he asked, his voice steady. Daniels smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong here." The group burst into laughter again, but Richard turned away and walked down the hallway without saying another word. As he made his way towards the main office, the intercom crackled to life, calling all personnel to the briefing room. It was time for his official introduction. The briefing room buzzed with chatter as officers gathered, some sipping coffee, others sharing inside jokes. Richard entered through a side door, unnoticed, holding a folder with the precinct's official seal. He watched the room fill, recognizing some faces from earlier, still chuckling about the incident with Daniels. At the front of the room, Captain Harris, a stout man with a gray mustache, called for silence. "Settle down, everyone. We have an important introduction today," he announced. The officers quieted, curiosity piqued. Daniels leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smug grin still on his face. He seemed pleased with how his morning had gone. "As many of you know, Chief Caldwell retired last month. We've been waiting for his replacement. Today, I'm pleased to introduce our new chief," Harris continued, smiling. Richard stepped forward, his footsteps deliberate. The room went silent as he walked to the podium. The officers stared in shock as the realization hit them. The man they had dismissed and ridiculed earlier was their new boss. "Good morning," Richard began, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Richard Nelson, and as of today, I'm your new chief of police." You could hear a pin drop. Daniel's face turned pale, his smug expression vanishing instantly. Whispers spread through the room, but Richard raised his hand, silencing them. When I arrived this morning, I chose to come in plain clothes. I wanted to see the department as it truly is, he explained. What I witnessed was eye-opening, to say the least. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Richard's stern gaze quieted them again. In just a short time here, I've seen behavior that is not only unprofessional but unacceptable. That kind of culture ends today. Richard's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He locked eyes with Daniel's, who now looked like a shadow of the arrogant man he had been minutes before. Respect isn't optional, Richard continued. It's the foundation of our work. Without it, we fail each other and the community we serve. He stepped away from the podium, walking directly towards Daniels. Officer Daniels, Richard called out. The officer flinched, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. You represent everything that's broken in this department, Richard said bluntly. When you spat in my face, you didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected the badge, the oath, and the community we swore to protect. Daniels tried to stammer out an excuse, but Richard cut him off. You didn't care to know who I was. You assumed I didn't matter. And that's exactly the problem. Turning back to the rest of the officers, Richard declared, this toxic culture stops now. Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended pending a full investigation. Gasps filled the room. Daniels' face turned bright red, his jaw clenched in anger, but he didn't dare speak. Richard continued, his voice rising slightly, this is just the beginning. If you're not willing to change, this isn't the place for you. But if you are, we'll rebuild this department together, with integrity and respect. The room was silent as Richard stepped back. Officers exchanged nervous glances, realizing the gravity of the situation. The days of turning a blind eye were over. Richard's decision to go undercover had exposed the harsh reality of his precinct, but it also marked the start of real change. He wasn't there to make friends, he was there to make a difference. Slowly but surely, respect and accountability became the new norm. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained and press the bell icon so you never miss another gripping story like this one. See you in the next tale.